everyone. This is Vishaka Raviraj with yet another episode of the Captivated series podcast. We are at episode 5, and another very interesting guest with us, Preeti Harris, is joining. And the title of today's episode is Pattern Making. She will tell us what is pattern making, how and when to use it while making lovely quilts. So let's start by wishing her a very good morning. It's early in the morning at her side. Preeti, good morning. I'm from Bangalore. Tell us, where are you from?
Good morning, Vishaka. I grew up in India, but now I live in Virginia, United States.
Okay, so all the way from the United States, we have Preeti, who very graciously agreed to wake up early in the morning and shoot the
Thank
episode.
you.
Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you.
So please, Preeti, tell the audience who is Preeti. Something that we will get to know a little bit about your growing up years and how did you take up quilting?
So I grew up in India, and I have an undergrad in architecture. I went to Roorkee, so I have that background of geometry and building and proportion and scale. So that I believe is a helpful background. But quilting was fairly new. I started quilting only in 2013. I met someone who was a quilter and she invited me to her meeting, to her guild meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So, guild is like a club for quilters, it's called a
Okay.
quilt guild. And we met each other at a gym class, and she invited me to her guild meeting. And that day, they were showing a documentary on American quilt making. And I sat there next to her, fascinated. And I was thinking, I can make this. I should be able to make this. This this is so beautiful. And I really want to do this. And I said to her, I said, I want to do this. And she asked me, do you have a sewing machine? And I said, yes, I have a sewing machine. And I bought the sewing machine when my mom was visiting me briefly. So when I was in the office, I needed for her to stay busy. So I had bought
Mhm.
this very basic $100 sewing machine from Walmart. And she had it at home so that she could repair a few things. So, yes,
Okay.
I was like, of course, I have a sewing machine. And then she asked me, do you know how to thread it? And I was quiet and I said, maybe. So that was 2012. She taught me how to thread my very basic machine. And I remember it was the Labor Day holiday. It was September of 2012. And that afternoon, we made a grocery bag out of an old t shirt.
Okay,
And
great.
the rest is history. After that, there was just so much information.
Mm.
I believe that if you want to learn something in today's time, anybody can find the information easily. There is just such a wealth of knowledge on YouTube and blogs and everything. So since then, I am self taught and I made my first quilt in 2013, and
Okay.
you know the rest.
Yeah. Wow. So from starting by making a grocery bag to having an Etsy shop today is a long journey.
10
And
years. Yes.
yes, 10 years, and I'm sure a lot of learning and ups and downs. So, yeah, good to know. So, in your childhood, growing up years, you've never done any sewing. Did you learn it as a part of school or at home? Did you see somebody sewing?
My
Yeah,
mother
your mother,
is
you
an
said.
accomplished sewist. So I remember that when we were younger, she would make all our clothes.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
I
All your
remember
clothes.
she would I remember, wearing this very pretty frock with large buttons and laces. And,
Wow,
she would go to this specialty store to buy these motifs that she would then embroider on our outfits.
wow.
So, yes, so I had that, growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember once in 10th grade, we had to make something as part of school. And I remember, doing it with her, cutting it on a piece of paper and,
Yeah.
making a gown slash maxi, just, to sleep in. And that was okay. Um, but after that, whenever we ever showed an interest in sewing,
Mm.
my mom would say, okay, we will start by making a petticoat, because that is how she learned,
Okay.
because you would buy a sari, or you would get a sari and you would get the blouse professionally made.
Yes.
But a petticoat, because you wear it inside, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yes.
So petticoat was something that women made at home,
Yes.
and that is how she learned, and that is what she was trying to teach us. And making a petticoat was of zero interest to me or my sister, so we never learned.
Okay.
If she was had she taught us how to make a skirt, okay, we can
Mm.
wear a skirt.
Yes. Yes.
So we never learned from her.
Okay.
It was a
Yeah.
it was a lost opportunity, but i
Okay.
i I saw her making
Hmm.
things. So
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So I think when you see it, you kind of feel that it's doable as compared to something that you haven't seen at all. So maybe somewhere inside you, there was a feeling or, a friendship with sewing.
it so when I started sewing, it
Uh,
became like something that I could share with my mom. I said, "Look,
yes.
mom, what I made." And even if it
Mm.
was not clothes, because that was what she did.
Hmm.
Again, growing up in India, you did not do things just because it was beautiful or it was
Mm.
pretty to look at.
Yeah.
Everything had to have a utilitarian aspect to it.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
um, we are not, culturally speaking, we are people who believe like, okay, you are putting something to use. It's
Hmm.
not, we rarely make something which is like, oh, it is going to be pretty, put it on the wall. That
Yeah.
is not who we are as a people.
Yes.
So
Yes.
but so when I make something now, I am so eager to share it with her, because it is an added dimension to our relationship. And
Yes.
she is really like, oh my gosh, how did you do this? So
Wow.
getting that validation from her is like the ultimate thing.
Yes.
So there was that. And the other aspect, like I mentioned, that my undergrad is in architecture.
Hmm.
So that understanding of, scale and proportion and, you know, just the color theory kind of things, the visual aspect of it is
Hmm.
something that I have in my background. So
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I'm sure that's a great advantage. So, what is your Etsy store called?
it's called So Preeti Quilts.
Okay, and what all do you, work out over there? What are the things that we can see at the store?
I have a couple of quilts, but mostly patterns, quilt
Okay.
patterns, beginner friendly, mostly
Mm-hmm.
beginner friendly quilt patterns.
Okay. The reason I asked, so or rather I purposely asked you this question because here in India, the pattern making concept is not very popular. With only the extreme and the very qualified quilters, they would attempt to, use a pattern or, make a quilt with a pattern. And developing a pattern is another line altogether. So, please tell us in your own words, what is a quilt pattern?
See, a quilt pattern is very simply a recipe. It's
Okay.
like, uh, you are going to, for example, the pot holders that I see behind you.
Yeah.
Okay, now that is something really simple, but I can say, so four squares in a line, and
Mm,
then you get, this is your first line. In the second line, so the same, but reverse the direction of it, and
mm,
then sew them all together.
yeah.
Add a 2-inch border, so that becomes, it's like it's like telling somebody how to make this in a very
Yes.
simple term. If somebody asked you, Bishaka, how did you make that?
Mm,
So
mm,
you can say, I took a four square patch, and then I added this and I added that, and then I
mm.
pressed this, and then this is, so that is the starting concept. And
Okay.
then you can develop it further.
Mm,
It is, I believe, important to have pictures
Mm, mm,
because
yeah.
we are working in a visual medium.
Mm,
So it is important to show steps, it's important to show pictures. Um, so very simply, it's like directions to make this. It's
mm.
a recipe, you know,
Okay.
just like we have patterns for making a skirt or a
Mm,
blouse. You know, you
mm,
start with so much fabric,
mm.
you know, cut it like this, put
Yeah.
a chalk mark over here. So it is simple. It
Mm,
can be, and it can be very complicated when, you know, there are paper pieced patterns. Then you actually need templates so that you
mm,
can use that template to cut your fabric in a specific shape.
mm.
Similarly, there could be a pattern for making a bag, you know,
Yeah.
not just a quilt. So if the bag has a special shape, so
Mm.
your pattern will come with that template. So
Yes.
you cut out that template, you put it on your piece of fabric, you trace it, and you cut it out accordingly. So there are steps to that, and there is a whole range of patterns from something very, very simple to very,
Mm.
very complicated. So there is a
Okay.
pattern for every skill level of a quilter.
Okay. Wow, that's so interesting. And also, I see a very pretty quilt behind you, which also looks like a pattern quilt. Could you please tell our audience a little bit about that?
So this is a quilt I made. First time I made that this pattern for Island Batik. I'm an
Okay.
ambassador for Island Batik.
Okay.
Um, so they provide me fabrics and supplies a couple times a year, and then we are required to make one project every month
Okay.
and share on social media. So I made this scrappy quilt one time for them as a part of the project. And I really liked it so much
Mhm.
that I decided to develop it as a pattern. So I call it Masala Box. And it
Okay.
is very beginner friendly because you can see there are no, it has got no triangles. It is just simple, very simple block, one
Mm.
simple block really. And you can make it out of your scraps. You can
Okay.
make it out of pre-cuts. If you have pre-cuts,
Mm,
you know,
mm.
like a 10-inch square, you can use that. You can use 2.5-inch strips to make that. You can use a 5-inch square to make that. So it is very beginner friendly. It is very versatile.
Okay.
And I call it masala box.
Okay. So masala box as in the Indian spice box that's available
Yes,
at home. Okay. Interesting. So is this an original pattern that you developed?
I I think so. I haven't seen it before.
Okay, great. The reason I asked so because uh, in the United States or outside our country, there are positions as pattern makers, right? People are given the liberty to design the original patterns and sell them. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like you are selling certain patterns, or there may be other
Yes.
quilters. So, can you tell us a little bit about that? How do what is this line of business where you develop a pattern and you sell it?
I don't know if I can call it a business.
Okay. Or let's say
uh,
a career, or maybe a hobby, or, you know,
yes. So
yeah.
it is I have a feeling that there are
Mm,
very few quilt pattern designers who can really who are really making money. You
okay.
know, it's a so um repeat your question again.
This entire concept of pattern making and when a person says this is an original pattern and you buy it from me, what is the idea behind that?
So for example, this when I made this for the
Hmm,
first time
hmm,
and I shared it on my blog,
hmm.
folks started asking, "Oh my gosh, this is such a lovely pattern. Do you have a tutorial for it?
Oh, a
Or
tutorial.
do you have a pattern for it?"
Okay.
So the difference between tutorial and pattern is very simple. It's
Hmm.
money.
Oh,
So if I
okay.
provide something for free on my blog, I will call
Hmm.
it a tutorial.
Oh,
If I put the same thing on my Etsy store and I charge money for it,
okay.
then I call it a pattern. It is
Hmm.
essentially the same thing. So,
Okay.
um, and in the beginning when I started my blog, I had several I wrote several tutorials because
Mm,
I was trying something, it's like, oh,
mm,
I like this. I saw something and I didn't find good directions for it. So I wrote my own directions and I shared them with my blog readers. So
okay.
it became a tutorial. There was one time I was making a quilt for my husband,
Mm,
and I took a lot of pictures, and I decided to share that pattern on my blog. But
mm-hmm,
it is it's a free. I can call it a free pattern because anybody
okay.
can go and see it. It is not, there is no money involved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And then again, I start with, you need these fabrics, you need half yard of this fabric, you
mm,
need 1 yard of this fabric. And then I show photographs. Like when I was working, I would take a picture and they say, just do it like this, press like
mm,
this, and move on to the next step. So I had some experience writing tutorials on my
okay,
blog that were free, and I
okay.
had a very good response from
Mm,
people.
oh,
So that was my background, like writing free tutorials, getting a good feedback, which
mm.
encouraged me that I can actually maybe sell it.
Yeah.
So the selling came only recently. I think I
Okay,
wrote my first tutorial in 2014, but
okay.
I wrote my first paid pattern in 2021.
Oh,
And so there was quite a time lag between that. And people want to get things for free. We
mm,
are reluctant to buy,
yes.
and and there are so many pattern designers on
Mm-hmm,
Etsy
mm-hmm,
and from all over the world. So everything is accessible and everything is competitive. So
yeah.
I don't think a lot of quilt designers can call it a business. It is a
Okay.
hobby that
Mm-hmm.
sort of supports itself
Okay,
at this
okay.
time.
Yeah, nice. So for me, when I heard this term a few years back, I was quite fascinated, and I've always been thinking that I should make a pattern, but I don't think I have reached that point yet. Uh, so what are the tools that you need for making these patterns? So are you like an old school, doing it with sketch pen on paper, or are you using some software to develop patterns? What is your way of doing patterns?
So initially, when I started writing a
Mm,
tutorial, then
mm.
it was I used an Excel spreadsheet.
Excel spreadsheet, okay.
So, just make the squares small and
Uh,
fill it with color. So that was
okay.
the simple concept.
Okay.
I have also used a sketchbook, which has, the math sketchbook
Mm-hmm,
with the
mm-hmm. Yeah,
squares,
yeah.
and which is helpful when I'm traveling.
Mm,
Sometimes we are going on a road trip, and my
okay.
husband is driving, and I'm sketching.
Okay.
So that was initially what I did.
Mm-hmm,
um Sometimes you don't do either. Sometimes it could be just, you start with a piece of fabric, you cut it, you take a picture, you sew it, you cut it again, you take another picture. So that is more of an improv way
so,
of making a
yes.
pattern. So
Mm-hmm,
for example, if you took two squares of fabric and put them one on top of another, and you make cuts, random, not straight line, because if it is a
mm-hmm,
straight line, you can show it in Excel or something.
mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
if it is random cuts, then you just, you cut, you take a picture, then you move them around, you take another picture. So sometimes you don't need any other software than just your camera or your phone. But initially, I used Sketchbook, I used spreadsheet. Right now, I'm using a software called EQ8.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And that is, I think that is one of the best investments I made.
Mm, okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
it is really, when you want to see the possibilities
Mm,
within a pattern,
mm,
so you still have to design your pattern. It includes some basic shapes.
mm.
So it has some basic blocks already built in, like traditional blocks, like a half square
Okay.
triangle or a four patch block. So
Okay.
some of those shapes are already included in EQ8. So you
Okay.
already have the building blocks
Yes.
within a basic EQ8 system. You can always buy more blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So you can buy and you can then download them and add it to your EQ8 software so that you can make more complicated blocks. Um,
Okay.
there are there are designers who design for EQ8 so then you can use you can, so
Okay.
and you can use that. Um, Yes, so with EQ8, so if I have this pattern in EQ8,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't because this was designed before I had EQ8, this was like designed in a spreadsheet. I can
Okay.
go in, I can change the colors, and that all those things are very easily done. I can change the layout. So,
Okay.
if you have if you have a triangle, you can move it in four different ways. So,
Wow.
things like that, yes, and every layout will, will give a different look.
Yeah.
So,
And it's an immediate visualization, like
it
you
is,
get to see
and
it
you can then
immediately.
take a screenshot and you can save it. You can send it to a magazine if they want to
Okay.
publish it. Um,
Wow.
and then that is actually the most, one of the most rewarding aspects, that when you design something and
Mhm.
somebody chooses to publish it and pay you for it.
Yes, yes. That's
Then you can really call yourself, I'm a pattern designer because
okay.
somebody's actually, thinks that you're valuable enough or your work is good enough to be published and
Okay.
shared with the general public. So
Wow. Yeah. So how long does it take? I mean, for out of your experience, the pattern that took the shortest amount of time and the longest amount of time, uh, like what was the duration? Like the quickest pattern or like a very long pattern? It took months to develop it.
it's so it's very difficult to answer that
Okay.
because sometimes, you have an idea and
Mm,
it just, so you are stewing it in your mind, like you have an
mm,
idea or you have a
mm,
sketch.
mm,
And writing a pattern is is when it really becomes a pattern. Other than that, I think of it as like, okay, it's a thought, it's an idea, it's not. But when you start
mm.
writing it down, okay, then it's like, okay, and the calculations that go into it.
Yeah.
So i I mean, if you have made a quilt already, so
Mm,
then the pattern writing becomes easy because you know
mm.
the steps in your head, like I'm
Yes.
going to do this, this, and this. That is the easy part. If you are, if it is something new that you are working on, supposing you are given an assignment,
Mm.
like one time you were given an assignment, use the flying goose unit to
Okay.
design a quilt.
Mm,
So that took a while
mm.
because it's like a work assignment, it's like
Yeah.
being in
Yeah.
a class and
Yes.
taking an exam. So
Mm,
I
mm.
was like, okay, if I start with this size unit and I use two of them, then you play with that layout. If I use three of these units and a blank space, then that is a block, and then you play with the layouts, the sizes, the directions. Should I use only one? Maybe I use one large and one small, and then put them together and see how it looks. So
Okay.
it is very difficult to say. Again, simple, generally speaking, a simple pattern will be faster, a complicated pattern will take a long time. Um,
Okay.
it is the writing of the pattern. When you start saying, okay, I need so many yards of this fabric,
Yeah.
that is when I would say it is really a pattern. It begins, and then you have to make sure that your calculations are correct, that if it needs half a yard, you cannot say it needs more because you
Oh,
are that would be wasteful. You
yes.
cannot say it is less because that would be very aggravating for whoever. So your calculations have to be correct.
Right.
Your
Yeah.
pictures have to be helpful. They have to be
Yes.
in order. And sometimes we include a coloring page. So
Wow.
we include a blank page. So and so that you can fill it with your own colors and see how it looks. I mean, I can do that in EQ8 if you have that
Okay.
software,
Okay.
but very few people will actually have that. So when I
Okay.
am publishing a pattern, I will include a blank page which
Yeah.
has like empty boxes. So you
Okay.
can go in colored, like, oh, I don't like the red over here. maybe I will put pink. How will that look? So it
Okay.
it gives you that option.
I
So
Now that we know a little bit about pattern, I want to ask you, what are pattern testers? Like, who are they?
okay. So a pattern tester is a quilter who
Mm.
has some time, some energy, and some excitement, and they are willing to try something new. So that is who a pattern tester is. When I write a pattern that is a little more complicated, or it has more steps, or just because I want to, I will reach out for quilters. Like, hey, I have this pattern. Would you be interested in testing it? And
Okay.
then I let them know you have to make, like, I had pattern testers for masala box. So
Oh,
I reached
okay.
out to people. I mean,
Mm.
it's not a complicated pattern, but because it was my first, I
Mm.
wanted to, see what would be the reaction and if there were any mistakes. The
Mm.
idea of pattern testing is basically to understand or to find the mistakes or clarifications before you send it out for publication. So
Okay.
it is like editing.
Okay.
And then there are technical editors who will. So pattern testers are free
Okay.
generally.
Generally, so
you
you
can you
just
can
give them your
obviously pay.
pattern
You
and you
can
ask
pay
them to
people
pay.
to test your pattern. It is absolutely acceptable, but you can also ask for volunteer pattern
Mm.
testers.
Mm.
And some people who like your work or who are interested in your patterns would be happy to test it because they get a free pattern and they get to get it before everybody else gets it.
Yeah.
So
Wow. So if I may
I
ask
have I
another
have
question
tested a
here.
pattern for somebody else one time.
Okay.
And it was a complicated pattern, but it was also exciting.
Yeah.
You're working on something new, and it's creative. So and then you get the feedback from the pattern testers, from
Mm.
these other
Mm.
quilters. They will tell
Mm.
you, instead of saying 2 inches, it should be 2.5 inches, something like that. Or they say, oh, this fabric is actually, you say you need half a yard, but I can manage only in a third of a yard. So they will tell you if there is a mistake in calculations, in
Mm.
spelling, or something like that. Or they will tell you, can you add an additional picture over here? Or can you add this? So the idea of pattern testing is to make sure there are no mistakes and
Mm.
getting feedback from people who would be actually making the pattern. So that's the idea. You
For
can have
pattern
paid
testing.
pattern testers, you can have volunteer pattern testers.
Okay. And so, in terms of that, what about the fabrics? Does the pattern maker send the fabrics, or the volunteer, he or she, arranges fabric to test the pattern? What about that?
So generally, um, the volunteer pattern testers will use their own fabric, generally
Okay.
speaking, and
Okay.
that is one of the things that when you ask for pattern testers, you can say, um, you have three options. You can make a baby size quilt, which would require so much fabric. You can make a lap size quilt, which would require so much fabric. Or you can make a bed size quilt, or, queen size, which would require so much fabric.
Mm.
So then people can decide whether they want to have that much time and energy to make something.
Yeah.
There are instances where you provide the fabric,
Okay.
but that fabric comes from the company. So for example, um, Island Batik has something called signature lines.
Okay.
So a new fabric line before it comes to the market, there is
Mm.
so much work that happens before it
Mm.
is available in the stores.
Mm.
So they will have some signature lines. So for example, there is a new fabric, so there are 20 fabrics in that, and I am the signature. It's my signature line. What
Okay.
that means is I haven't designed it,
Mm.
but I will be sort of adopting those fabrics as mine, and I will be making 5, 6 patterns from that one fabric line. Fabric line
Okay.
is 20 fabrics. And then I can reach out to other quilters and ask them, hey, this is a new fabric line coming from Island Batik. Would you like to use these fabrics and
Hmm.
design a pattern?
Hmm.
But they are not, at that point, they are not testing a pattern. They are
Yeah, they're
making something
designing.
new.
Yeah.
And I will send them the fabric, but I have received it from Island Batik.
Yes.
So they will receive free fabric. They
Hmm.
will get to keep the quilt. They will have to share it on social media, tagging the fabric and the company and everything. And they will get to keep the quilt.
Hmm.
So the instance where the fabric is being provided to them also means that they are designing the pattern.
So that's the thing. So that's about the pattern testers and paid, it can be, or it can be volunteered about the fabric. And so when you say, let's say for the masala box, is there like a standard size of of your testing pattern testers, like 5 or 3 or 7, or is there a number, or it can be any number to standardize the pattern?
So, are you asking the number of pattern testers or the
Yeah, yeah,
size of
yeah.
the quilt?
No, the number of pattern testers. So
That
would
is
even one
entirely,
person be enough? Like only
yes.
one
Okay.
person test?
It because it is not like it is there is no standard for that.
Okay,
Sometimes I publish a pattern and I have had zero pattern testers. Nobody tested that pattern.
okay.
So it's not a requirement.
Oh, it's not like a
Okay.
compulsion that every pattern maker has to go through, that you test
No,
it.
no, no, no.
Okay,
So
okay,
um I designed a pattern for the catalog. Island
okay.
Batik company publishes two catalogs a year. They have a spring summer catalog and they have a fall winter catalog. And you submit patterns to be published in the catalog. And once I made the design, I submitted it to them, they liked it. So
Hmm,
then they sent me the fabric, I make the
okay,
pattern, and I make the
okay,
quilt. So nobody tested that at that time.
okay,
So I
okay.
made the quilt, I wrote the pattern. If I want, before I publish it on my Etsy store,
Hmm,
I can ask for I can reach out to my quilter friends and say, would you
hmm,
like to test a pattern? And
mm-hmm.
that's what I did when I reached out to Dipti
Tripti.
for Rainbow Parade,
Yeah.
because I was like, this is such a fun pattern.
Hmm,
So the purpose of pattern testing, yes, it is to, correct errors and, seek clarification, seek feedback. But it is also to make it more popular, because
yeah,
when Dipti makes my pattern and she shares it, that is also getting me some advertisement
yeah.
that
That's
this is
how
a
I
new
got to know
pattern.
you.
Yes,
Looking at her, yeah, that's how
right.
I got to know
So
you. Yeah.
so sometimes I do that not because I need the pattern feedback, not because I need corrections or clarifications, but because it's an investment I'm making. So I send it to 5 people. And
Hmm.
again, I can send it to 10 people, but if they're not
Okay.
available, if they're not busy, then I may only get 3 or 4 people.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it has happened that one time I only had one pattern tester.
Uh-huh.
So the number is up to you. It can be from 0 to whatever you want.
Okay.
And again, depends on, who is, and sometimes you cannot find anybody because
Hmm.
like you need to publish something in a
Hmm.
2 week period and there is not enough time for
Hmm.
people to make it and test it.
Hmm.
And I have asked a couple of folks, can you just read through my pattern? Can you just
Okay.
see, just read it and review it if everything makes sense, if everything looks correct.
Yeah.
So I have done that for someone, and someone else has done that for me. So it's not testing, but it is just reviewing the document,
Hmm.
just
Wow.
reviewing the it. Yes. So again, there is a whole range.
Yeah, I'm
So
learning a lot
yes.
today. Yes.
So
Yeah.
I would encourage you to go through my tutorials, because
Yeah.
then you can actually see what are the steps involved, what pictures I'm providing, and
Hmm.
maybe make one block.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
if you don't have the time to make an entire quilt, follow
Hmm.
the tutorial and make 1 or 2 blocks and
Hmm.
see like, okay, is this something that you want to, continue, or making one of your own designs into a
Mm,
pattern like this? These are the steps that would be required.
yeah.
So there are lots of patterns out in the world, and some are
Yes.
well written and some are poorly written. So
Mm,
you
mm, mm,
know a lot of my frustration initially was like, oh my gosh, this pattern could benefit from a picture, or this is not well written, or why would I make these four things if I can make this in one step? So
mm.
the end result looks the same,
Same. Okay.
but you can get to that end destination from a few different routes.
Yeah.
So something, and this is one thing that I think I do often, is how can I simplify this? How
Mm,
can I
mm,
make this easier? So
mm,
a lot of times my directions or my pattern is about, yes, we are making this thing which has been made earlier. It is
mm,
not an original design, but
mm-hmm.
my method of getting here, that is
It's
original.
simpler. Yeah. Yeah.
And I have done that in one of my tutorials. I put a disclaimer,
Mm-hmm.
this is not new. Somebody
Mm,
has already designed this and made this, but the method that I'm suggesting,
mm,
that is definitely new.
mhm, mhm.
So,
Yeah. That's cool. So, according to you, what are the pros and cons of pattern making? Like advantages and disadvantages?
well, supposing you want to make something, which is, you saw something, it's like, oh my
Mm,
gosh, this is so beautiful, I want to make that. But you don't know where to start, or you don't know
mhm,
how much of anything would be required. And that is when a pattern is helpful. It's
mm,
like, and that happens. You go to a quilt show or something, and
mm,
you see, oh my gosh, I want to learn her technique, or I want to be able to create, a portrait quilt like that. So you would need a class, you would need
yeah.
a workshop, you would need
Yeah.
a pattern for that. So, to be able to learn a new technique, a new pattern, yes, then you would need that. That is, the pros of, somebody. The con is that it can be limiting. That, okay, then you have provided this, and so you have to
Yeah.
follow those steps. But overall, I don't see a negative aspect, because
Mm,
even
mm,
when you are doing something that is limiting, you grow, you learn, and then you
yeah.
can apply those skills in whatever you do going forward.
Yeah.
Working from a I mean, I know because of the kind of quilts you make, the Kavandi
Mhm.
quilts are very improv, you
Yes.
know? It's you only know the next step. You have a general idea where you're going, but it's
Correct.
only like, okay, I'm going to add this. Oh, I don't like this. I can
Mhm.
change that. And
Yeah.
I do some work like that. And I feel that is very liberating, you know? And it is it's like we are at the same level. The quilt and me, we are working together.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm in charge.
Yeah. Discovering
We
each
in
other.
Yes, so
Yeah.
it's like quilt will reveal to you, it's like you make it and you are having a conversation like, I don't like this, no,
Mhm.
I don't want pink over here, put orange over here. The quilt is
Mhm.
talking to you.
Yes.
So you are collaborating, the quilt
Yeah.
becomes this person, that
Yeah.
tells you how it wants to be. And to me, that is very exciting. But when you
Mhm.
want to do something specific, for example, you want to make a portrait quilt, so that is something, very technical. So
Yeah.
you have to go through the steps.
Yeah.
Like I like to think about it, like cooking. If you want to make a salad, you can throw whatever vegetables you have and you can toss it, and it is your improv.
Yeah.
But if you want to make something, something more complicated dish, like you have to make biryani, or I
Mhm.
don't know, bagara bengan, for example. Then
Yeah.
you have to follow the steps correctly. You have to,
Correct.
roast the peanuts first, set it aside. you know, it is a more step by step
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Is one better than the other? No, they are just different, and you use them for different purposes. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. In fact, I'm going to use your, analogy of the quilt, like with Kavandi or Kaudi, that I talk to the quilt and the quilt talks back to me. I'm going to use it as a part of my book, and I'm going to quote you because it's so true. The quilt talks to you. But if it is a
Yes.
pattern, it's more like, there is somebody giving you the guidelines to construct a quilt. Yeah. So that is where the
If you
pattern takes you.
Yes, but again, if
Mm,
you're familiar with improv work, that'll
mm,
help you in your pattern writing. And if you are
mm,
familiar with a pattern quilt, that will
mm.
also help you with your improv.
Yes.
Because if you're working on a pattern quilt, and if you have that background of improv, then you can decide a few things like, oh,
Mm,
this is not looking right, I can change it.
mm,
Or instead of having 3 blocks in a row, I can just have 2 blocks and add a border. So
mm.
there is always some room for improv, even if it is a pattern quilt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you have experience with patterns, then you know then when you're working on an improv
Mm,
that, yes, because I have done this before, I can do this in my improv. Like, okay, I generally work, the improv is supposed to be completely free,
mm.
but yes, I can still do this and I can still add a border.
Yeah.
Or I can, so there can be
Yeah.
like, oh, this fabric is going to get cut off if I stop here. So maybe I
Mm,
can add. So it, both those things, working with a pattern and working improv, can
mm.
inform either process.
Yeah.
It
Wow.
doesn't, it, I encourage people
Yeah.
to, try a tutorial, try a
Yes.
pattern so that you
Yes.
can see the benefit of working in stepwise instruction.
Yeah.
But even more than that, I encourage people to try improv because it is so liberating.
Yeah, yeah, that's what Deepthi from Quilt Stories magazine is always, encouraging quilters to make new patterns and try them out. So that's one more reason why I wanted to have this episode with you, and let the audience gain a little more confidence about pattern making.
There are a
So
couple of my patterns in quilt stories.
yeah, yeah, yeah. She's doing a wonderful job having the
Yes,
only magazine, quilting magazine, and 3 years running and going.
running. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, that's
yeah.
right. Yes.
So before we end, any one particular tip or advice that you would want to give our viewers in terms of pattern making or, working with patterns?
Don't be afraid of making mistakes.
Wonderful.
It's
Yeah,
only fabric, So
yeah,
yes, try something new. You will
yeah,
learn something. You can always, if you never try, you will never improve. So
yeah.
try something, take a plunge.
Yeah, yeah, I think now I should, as your primary listener, the first person listening to this conversation, I should give my hand on a pattern.
Well, you already do so much. So
Yeah,
it's
but
not like you are not doing it. It's for people who are, sort of, stick to one kind of thing. They are in very uh, limited,
yeah,
and it's like, hey, try something different. And if you don't want to buy a pattern, because I understand why, this is the challenge with a pattern, that unless you buy it, you cannot
mm,
see what is inside. And
oh,
once
okay,
you don't see the steps till you buy the pattern.
yeah,
And then once you buy it and you see the steps, you don't like it, well, you've already paid the money. So so
yeah,
there is that challenge, if somebody is like, well, I don't want to spend so much, I don't want to buy something for $12 and then not
mm,
like it.
mm,
And that is the reason why I have tutorials. So you can
mm,
see my style. You can
okay,
use some of my free tutorials. If you like my style, if you like my directions, then you may be encouraged to spend $10 to,
mm,
buy a pattern. So, take your pick. I would
yeah,
encourage folks to go to my blog to take a look at my tutorials, make something from there. And
mm,
if you like it, then you can go to my Etsy shop and buy it. So, try before you buy.
yeah. Wonderful piece of advice. So, along with the YouTube video, I will put in all the details of Preeti's contacts, her Etsy store name, her blog name. So, y'all can go there and look out for tutorials and patterns if you think you want to take the next step. So thank you so much, Preeti. It was wonderful talking to you. I, of course, learned a few things, in fact, more things today about pattern making. Thank you so much for being a part of
Thank you.
this.